A dog finds a baby in the trash and takes it to the hospital. The nurse was shocked when thunder cracked across the sky as Dr. Sarah Matthews rushed through the rain-slicked emergency entrance of Fairview General Hospital. The October storm had knocked out power across half the town, leaving the hospital running on generators. Lightning illuminated the parking lot in harsh bursts, casting strange shadows against the building's walls. Dr. Matthews, quick, Jenny, the night nurse, called out urgently from the entrance. You need to see this. Sarah followed Jenny through the dimly lit corridor to the emergency room side entrance. There, huddled against the door, was an aging German Shepherd, its gray-flecked coat soaked from the rain. At its feet lay a bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. He's been sitting there for 10 minutes, Jenny whispered, won't let anyone near. Sarah approached slowly, her heart pounding. The dog's intelligent eyes met hers, studying her with an intensity that seemed almost human. Instead of growling, it stepped aside, revealing what it had been protecting. A newborn baby no more than a few hours old lay wrapped in the blanket. As Sarah knelt to examine the infant, she noticed something extraordinary, a distinctive birthmark on the baby's right shoulder, shaped like a small crescent moon. He's hypothermic, Sarah announced, quickly lifting the baby. The German Shepherd watched every movement, its tail giving a single wag as if approving her care. Get me warming blankets and call NICU. As they rushed the baby inside, Sarah noticed a small note tucked into the blanket's folds. In hurried handwriting it read, his name is Oliver, please protect him, they're watching. The dog followed them inside, its nails clicking against the linoleum floor. Despite the staff's attempts to shoo it away, it remained stationed outside the treatment room, its eyes fixed on the baby through the glass. Through the storm's fury, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the parking lot, a dark figure standing motionless in the rain, watching. When lightning flashed again, the figure was gone. As she worked to stabilize the baby's temperature, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. The German Shepherd's presence, the mysterious note, the birthmark, none of it felt like coincidence. What she couldn't know was that this stormy night would unravel a decades-old secret that would shake Fairview to its core, and that the aging dog outside was more than just a stray, it was a guardian carrying out one final mission. 5 years before that fateful stormy night, Sarah Matthews had been one of Boston Metropolitan Hospital's most promising emergency physicians. Her colleagues called her the miracle worker for her uncanny ability to save patients others had given up on. But it was this same dedication that would eventually lead to her downfall. The incident that changed everything happened during a busy winter shift. A homeless man had been brought in with severe hypothermia, his vital signs barely detectable. The hospital administrator, Dr. Richard Crawford, had already declared him a lost cause and ordered staff to discontinue treatment. But Sarah saw something in the man's eyes, a flicker of life that refused to fade. Against direct orders, she continued resuscitation efforts. For 6 hours straight, she worked tirelessly, using every technique she knew. When the man finally opened his eyes and squeezed her hand, Sarah thought it was a victory. Instead, it marked the beginning of her nightmare. Dr. Crawford accused her of insubordination and wasting hospital resources. The board meeting that followed was a carefully orchestrated character assassination. They labeled her emotionally unstable and unable to accept reality. Her persistence was reframed as obsession, her compassion as a liability. The final blow came when they questioned her mental fitness to practice medicine. Dr. Matthews, Crawford had said, his voice dripping with false concern, your inability to let go shows a dangerous lack of judgment. We can't have doctors who put their emotional attachments above hospital protocol. The worst part wasn't losing her job, it was the betrayal of colleagues she'd considered friends. People she'd worked alongside for years suddenly couldn't meet her eyes in the hallway. Rumors spread about her mental state, each whisper cutting deeper than the last. The wrongful dismissal lawsuit that followed drained her savings and tarnished her reputation. No major hospital would touch her after that. Sarah found herself moving from small town to small town to small town, taking temporary positions, never staying long enough to form connections. The vibrant, confident doctor she'd once been retreated behind walls of caution and self-doubt. Fairview General had been her last chance. The small-town hospital was desperately understaffed, and the administrator, Dr. Thompson, was willing to look past the rumors. But Sarah kept to herself, working the night shift, avoiding staff gatherings. She'd learned the hard way that caring too much made you vulnerable. The loss that haunted her most happened 3 months before the Boston incident. Sarah had been pregnant, looking forward to single motherhood despite her family's disapproval. The stress of the investigation and subsequent legal battle took its toll. She lost the baby in her second trimester, another piece of herself gone. Perhaps that's why baby Oliver's arrival struck such a deep chord. As she held him that stormy night, something long frozen inside her began to thaw. The mysterious German shepherd's trust, the baby's grip on her finger, the urgent plea for protection in that hastily written note, it all seemed to offer a second chance she never expected. But Sarah knew better than anyone how quickly everything could fall apart. She'd learned to expect judgment, doubt, and betrayal. As she cared for Oliver in those first crucial hours, she couldn't shake the feeling that once again her instinct to protect would put her at odds with those in power. What she didn't realize was that her past, painful as it was, had prepared her for exactly this moment. The same qualities that had once been used against her, her persistence, her deep empathy, her willingness to fight for those others had given up on, would prove essential in the challenges to come. Looking at Oliver's sleeping face, Sarah made a silent promise. This time would be different. This time she wouldn't let anyone stop her from doing what she knew was right. The mysterious birthmark on his shoulder seemed to pulse gently in the dim light, as if acknowledging her vow. Outside the treatment room, the old German shepherd maintained its vigil, a silent guardian whose presence would soon prove more significant than Sarah could imagine. In the parking lot, security cameras caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving through the rain, their interest in the abandoned baby raising questions that would take months to unravel. 7 years before finding Oliver, Max had been the pride of Fairview Police Department's K-9 unit. His exceptional intelligence and protective instincts made him legendary among local law enforcement. But it was a chance encounter with Elizabeth Henderson that would change his destiny forever. The fire at Henderson Manor started in the early hours of a summer morning. Elizabeth, then 8 months pregnant, had been trapped in her study by the rapidly spreading flames. When Max and his handler responded to the call, the German shepherd broke protocol, ignoring his handler's commands to wait for backup. He charged through the burning building, following Elizabeth's scent through the smoke-filled corridors. Max found her unconscious near a window, overcome by smoke. Despite his own singed fur and burning paws, he dragged her to safety moments before the floor collapsed. That night created an unbreakable bond between them. Elizabeth visited him daily during his recovery at the veterinary hospital, spending hours talking to him about her hopes, fears, and the child she carried. 3 months later, when Max's handler was killed in the line of duty, Elizabeth stepped in. She adopted the aging K-9 officer, giving him a new purpose. But those who knew Elizabeth noticed something different about her relationship with Max. She trained him in unusual ways, teaching him to recognize specific locations around Fairview, memorize routes through the town, and most importantly, to watch for people in distress. Max isn't just a dog, Elizabeth would tell her skeptical family. He understands more than you know. Sometimes the most loyal guardians come with 4 legs instead of 2. Her words proved prophetic when she disappeared 2 years later, leaving only a note: "Trust Max. He knows what to do." The townspeople expected Max to pine away for his missing owner, but he surprised everyone. He established a routine, patrolling Fairview's streets with purpose. Residents grew accustomed to seeing the dignified German shepherd making his rounds, checking on elderly neighbors, following children to school from a distance, appearing mysteriously whenever someone seemed in trouble. Sarah Matthews' porch became one of his regular stops. Something about the quiet doctor drew him. Perhaps her solitude matched his own. She never tried to capture him or force him to stay, just left out fresh water and occasionally talked to him about her day. Max would listen with that same intelligent gaze that had once earned Elizabeth's trust. What no one knew was that every night, Max would return to Henderson Manor, maintaining a silent vigil. The abandoned property became his base of operations, though few ever saw him enter or leave. Local children whispered stories about the ghost dog, who protected Fairview, appearing when needed most, then vanishing like a shadow. The years took their toll on his once black coat, now heavily streaked with gray. His joints grew stiffer, his patrols shorter. But his eyes never lost their sharp intelligence, and his sense of purpose never wavered. It was as if he was waiting for something or someone. On his daily rounds, Max often paused near the hospital watching the comings and goings with unusual interest. The night staff grew used to his presence, some even sneaking him treats. But on that stormy night when Oliver arrived, they saw a different side of the old dog. The fierce protectiveness, the absolute certainty in his actions. It was like he'd been preparing for this moment all along. The note tucked into Oliver's blanket carried a scent Max hadn't encountered in 5 years, but would never forget. Elizabeth's scent. As he stood guard outside the treatment room, memories of his last day with her flooded back. Her tears as she hugged him goodbye, her whispered instructions, her promise that one day he would understand why she had to leave. Looking at baby Oliver through the glass, Max knew his most important mission was just beginning. The birthmark on the infant's shoulder was identical to the one he'd seen countless times on Elizabeth's own shoulder during their long talks in the Manor study. The connection was unmistakable. As dawn approached and the storm began to fade, Max settled more firmly into his position outside the treatment room. His aging body might protest, but he would not fail in this final duty. Elizabeth had trusted him with something precious, and he would protect it with his last breath. The Henderson family had been Fairview's silent guardians for 4 generations. From their magnificent Victorian mansion on the hill, they appeared to be merely wealthy benefactors, but their true legacy ran deeper than anyone suspected. Since the Great Depression, the Hendersons had operated a secret network helping people escape dangerous situations and start new lives. Elizabeth Henderson grew up watching her parents coordinate safe houses, arrange new identities, and protect those who had nowhere else to turn. The family motto carved subtly above the manor's entrance, "Read in darkness, we provide light." As the only child of James and Margaret Henderson, Elizabeth was groomed from birth to continue this tradition. But Elizabeth saw beyond the family's careful protocols. Where her parents maintained emotional distance from those they helped, she formed connections. She remembered names, followed up on cases, celebrated their successes. Her father warned her repeatedly about getting too involved. "Our strength lies in our anonymity," he would say. "Emotional attachments make us vulnerable." Everything changed when Elizabeth met Dr. Thomas Carter during her volunteer work at Fairview General. He was a brilliant young physician with a passion for helping the underprivileged. Their connection was immediate and profound. But Thomas came from a humble background, worlds apart from the Henderson legacy. The family's opposition to their relationship was swift and absolute. "The Henderson line must remain pure," her father declared. "Our responsibility is too great to risk on romantic whims." But Elizabeth saw in Thomas the same dedication to helping others that had defined her family for generations. Their secret relationship lasted 2 years before Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. The family's reaction was severe. They threatened to cut her off completely, to end her involvement in their protection network. But it was what she discovered in her father's study that forced her hand. Hidden documents revealed a darker side to the Henderson legacy. Her father had begun selecting who deserved help based on their potential usefulness to the family's influence. Those who couldn't offer valuable connections or future favors were being turned away. The network was becoming less about protection and more about power. Elizabeth made her choice. On a rainy night much like the one that would bring Oliver to Sarah years later, she left a letter for her parents. "The true Henderson legacy isn't about maintaining power, it's about offering hope. My child will learn this legacy from those who understand its real meaning." She disappeared that night, taking only Max and a small box of family documents. Her parents hired private investigators, but Elizabeth had learned too well how to make someone vanish. She spent her pregnancy moving between safe houses she'd helped establish, arranging her own network of trusted allies. When Oliver was born, Elizabeth saw the crescent birthmark on his shoulder identical to her own, a mark that had appeared in every generation of Henderson guardians. She knew then that she couldn't keep him with her. Her parents' investigators were getting too close, and she had one final mission to complete. Elizabeth spent months preparing, using her knowledge of the family network to help those her father had rejected. She established new safe houses, created independent support systems, and documented everything. Max became her constant companion, learning routes and locations, being trained for his most important role. The hardest part was knowing she would never see Oliver grow up. Her terminal diagnosis gave her 6 months at most, barely enough time to ensure his future. Every letter she wrote him, every clue she left, every carefully chosen guardian she put in place was colored by this knowledge. Sarah Matthews caught Elizabeth's attention during one of her final visits to Fairview. She watched the doctor fight for her patients against hospital bureaucracy, saw her quiet strength and unwavering compassion. In Sarah, Elizabeth recognized the true spirit of the Henderson legacy, not in wealth or social status, but in the simple determination to help others at any cost. Max proved invaluable in these last preparations. Elizabeth trained him to recognize Sarah, to understand the importance of Oliver's birthmark, to know exactly when and where to be when the time came. "You'll know what to do," she told him during their final goodbye. "Keep them safe until they're ready to understand." The night Elizabeth Henderson disappeared for the second and final time, she left one last message hidden in the manor: the true legacy lives not in our name but in our actions. Those who protect others without seeking power or recognition, they are the real guardians. 2 weeks after Oliver's arrival, Sarah faced her first custody hearing in the Fairview County Courthouse. Despite her medical credentials and stable employment, her history from Boston cast a long shadow. Richard Crawford, her former supervisor, had somehow learned of Oliver's case and submitted a damaging testimony about her emotional instability. Dr. Matthews has a history of obsessive attachment to patients, his statement read. Her judgment becomes clouded by emotional involvement, making her unsuitable as a guardian for a vulnerable child. The words felt like a knife twisting in an old wound, but Sarah forced herself to remain composed as Judge Eleanor Parker reviewed the documents. The social worker assigned to Oliver's case, Margaret Wilson, seemed determined to find fault with every aspect of Sarah's life. During home visits, she criticized everything from Sarah's night shift schedule to the suspicious presence of a stray dog that refused to leave the property. Max's protective behavior around Oliver, which Sarah saw as reassuring, was labeled as potentially dangerous. A single woman working irregular hours, with a documented history of mental health concerns, living alone with an aggressive stray animal, Margaret listed off during the hearing. These are not ideal conditions for an infant. The courtroom felt suffocating as Sarah listened to her life being dismantled piece by piece. But the greatest threat came from an unexpected source. A prestigious couple from Boston, the Blackwoods, had filed for emergency custody of Oliver. Their petition cited their extensive experience as foster parents and their considerable financial resources. What they couldn't explain was their specific interest in this particular abandoned infant in a small town hours from Boston. The child deserves a stable, traditional family environment, their lawyer argued. A mother and father who can provide constant care, not a single doctor with questionable judgment working night shifts. The implications stung, but something about their involvement felt wrong to Sarah. Their paperwork was too perfect, their timing too convenient. Late one night, Sarah discovered Max pawing at a loose floorboard in her guest room. Hidden underneath was an old envelope, addressed to the guardian of the Crescent child. Inside she found newspaper clippings about the Blackwoods' connections to several suspicious adoptions, all involving infants with distinctive birthmarks. The article's author had disappeared before publishing their full investigation. During a particularly tense home visit, Margaret Wilson caught Oliver's blanket shifting, revealing his Crescent birthmark. Sarah noticed the social worker's hand trembling as she made a phone call immediately after leaving. Within hours, the Blackwoods lawyers had filed for an emergency custody transfer. Sarah's own lawyer, David Mitchell, worked pro bono after witnessing her dedication to Oliver. "Something's not right about this case," he confided. "The Blackwoods have too much influence for a routine adoption. They've expedited every process, bypassed normal procedures. It's like they have the whole system in their pocket." The pressure mounted as the final custody hearing approached. Anonymous complaints about Sarah's fitness as a guardian flooded the family services office. Her work schedule was suddenly scrutinized by hospital administration. Even her apartment building received mysterious inquiries about her tenant history. Through it all, Max remained a constant presence, his vigilance increasing as the threats multiplied. He began sleeping in Oliver's room, responding with low growls to any unexpected visitors. Sarah noticed him frequently watching the street, particularly when expensive black cars drove past. The night before the final hearing, Sarah sat in Oliver's room fighting exhaustion and despair. The baby slept peacefully, one tiny hand curled around her finger, while Max maintained his guard by the window. Looking at them, Sarah felt a fierce certainty that this was her family, unconventional as it might be. "I won't let them take you," she whispered to Oliver. "Whatever it takes, I'll protect you." Max turned from his watch to meet her eyes, and in that moment Sarah felt like he was trying to tell her something crucial about why protecting Oliver mattered more than she knew. What Sarah couldn't realize was that the custody battle was more than a simple adoption case. Forces were moving behind the scenes, using the legal system as a weapon. The Blackwoods weren't just wealthy prospective parents, they were part of a larger plan that had been waiting years to unfold. The first real clue about Oliver's identity came from an unexpected source: Claire Thompson, the elderly librarian who had worked at Fairview Public Library for over 40 years. One rainy afternoon, while Sarah was picking up children's books, Claire pulled her aside, her weathered hands trembling as she handed over a dusty photo album. "I recognize the birthmark," Claire whispered, glancing nervously around the empty library. "I've only seen it once before on Elizabeth Henderson." The album contained photographs from Fairview's centennial celebration 15 years ago. There, in a faded image, stood a young Elizabeth Henderson, her shoulder bearing the same crescent-shaped mark that Oliver carried. Sarah spent that night poring over the photos while Oliver slept nearby, Max maintaining his usual vigil. The resemblance was striking. Oliver had Elizabeth's eyes, the same gentle curve of his mouth when he smiled. But it was a detail in the background of one photo that caught her attention: a young doctor standing just behind Elizabeth, looking at her with unmistakable devotion. The next morning, Sarah visited retired nurse Margaret Wilson, who had worked at Fairview General for over 3 decades. The old woman's hand shook as she served tea. "That would be Dr. Thomas Carter," she said, identifying the man in the photo. "Brilliant physician, devoted to helping the poor. The Hendersons didn't approve, said he wasn't good enough for their daughter." Margaret revealed how Elizabeth and Thomas had continued their relationship in secret, meeting at the hospital during his night shifts. She volunteered in the pediatric ward, Margaret recalled. "They thought they were being discreet, but love like that, it shows." The nurse's eyes filled with tears. Then one day they were both gone. The official story was that Thomas accepted a position abroad, but some of us suspected there was more to it. The pieces began falling into place when Sarah discovered an old journal hidden in Oliver's baby blanket. The entries, written in Elizabeth's elegant hand, told a story of forbidden love, family opposition, and impossible choices. "They don't understand," one passage read. "The Henderson legacy isn't about maintaining power, it's about protecting those who need help. Thomas sees this truth more clearly than my own family." Max seemed particularly agitated when Sarah read these entries aloud, pacing and whining softly. Following his lead, she found more hidden documents around her household: letters, photographs, even a small key with the initials EH. Each piece revealed more about Elizabeth's struggle between family duty and personal happiness. A breakthrough came when Sarah treated an elderly groundskeeper who had worked at Henderson Manor. Delirious with fever, he spoke of secret meetings in the garden, of Elizabeth's pregnancy, and of her father's rage upon discovering it. "She knew they'd try to take the baby," he muttered. "Said the birthmark meant the child would be special, a true guardian, not just a Henderson in name." The most revealing clue appeared during one of Oliver's checkups. Dr. Patricia Chin, reviewing his medical records, noticed something odd. "These baseline tests," she said, comparing charts. "They're identical to ones run on Elizabeth Henderson 25 years ago. Someone wanted proof of the genetic connection, but why?" Sarah began noticing other connections. The way Max always let Oliver stroller down certain streets as if following a memorized path. The strange reaction of older townspeople when they saw Oliver's birthmark. The mysterious protection that seemed to surround them, despite the mounting custody battle. One night, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself tracing the pattern of Oliver's birthmark. The crescent shape wasn't just a random mark, it matched the symbol carved subtly into the Henderson Manor's gates. Max, watching her make this connection, suddenly retrieved an old collar he'd kept hidden under Sarah's porch. Attached to it was a small pendant bearing the same symbol. The final piece came from Claire, who had been secretly researching the Henderson family history. The birthmark appears in every generation, she explained, showing Sarah ancient family photographs. But only in those who become guardians of the family's true purpose. Elizabeth was the last one to bear it until Oliver. As Sarah pieced together these clues, she began to understand why the Blackwoods were so interested in Oliver. This wasn't just about adopting a baby, it was about controlling a legacy. But what that legacy truly meant, and why it was worth such a fierce custody battle, remained a mystery that Max seemed determined to help her solve. The first time Sarah noticed the stranger was on a foggy morning 3 weeks after Oliver's arrival. A tall figure in a dark coat stood beneath the oak tree across the street, seemingly focused on her house. When Max spotted the watcher, his reaction was unexpected. Instead of barking, his tail gave a single subtle wag of recognition. Every few days the stranger would reappear, sometimes in the early morning as Sarah returned from her night shift, sometimes at dusk as she walked Oliver in the garden. He never approached, maintaining a respectful distance that felt more protective than threatening. Sarah began to notice small signs of his presence: footprints in her garden after rainy nights, mysteriously shoveled sidewalks after snowfall. "There's something familiar about him," Claire Thompson remarked one afternoon watching through the library window as the figure disappeared around a corner. "The way he stands, how he moves, it reminds me of someone, but I can't quite place it." She passed Sarah an old photograph of the hospital staff from 20 years ago, but the connection remained elusive. The stranger's presence intensified as the custody battle grew more heated. On nights when the Blackwoods' black cars cruised past Sarah's house, he would appear on different street corners watching. After particularly tense court sessions, Sarah would find fresh flowers on her porch, always white lilies, Elizabeth Henderson's favorite. Dr. Patricia Chin provided another puzzle piece during one of Oliver's checkups. "Someone's been accessing Elizabeth's old medical records," she confided. "A doctor using credentials from 20 years ago. The handwriting on the request forms, it's hauntingly familiar." The mystery deepened when Sarah found a series of medical journals hidden in her garden, each containing brilliant research on pediatric care in underprivileged communities. The author's name had been carefully removed, but the writing style matched letters she'd found from Dr. Thomas Carter to Elizabeth. One stormy night, similar to when Oliver first arrived, Sarah heard noises in her backyard. Through the rain-streaked window she saw Max approach the dark figure who had finally ventured closer to the house. Instead of aggressive behavior, the old dog sat beside the stranger, accepting a gentle pat on his head. The man spoke softly to Max, his words carried away by the wind. But Sarah caught a glimpse of his face, and a flash of lightning distinguished features marked by years of worry, kind eyes that held a deep sadness. He looked up, meeting her gaze through the window, and Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. Those were Oliver's eyes. Anonymous notes began appearing, warning of the Blackwoods' next legal moves before they happened. The handwriting matched marginal notes in the medical journals, precise, careful strokes characteristic of a surgeon. Each warning proved accurate, allowing Sarah to prepare her defenses in advance. Margaret Wilson, during one of her more candid moments, shared a crucial detail. "Dr. Carter didn't just leave Fairview," she revealed. "He spent years establishing free clinics in poor communities, places where people needed help disappearing and starting over. Elizabeth used to say he understood the true meaning of being a guardian." The stranger's protective presence extended beyond Sarah's house. When she worked night shifts, staff reported seeing him in the hospital parking lot. On Oliver's walks, he shadowed their path from a distance. Even during court appearances, he would sit at the back of the room, his presence somehow giving Sarah strength. One evening, Sarah found a worn leather medical bag on her porch. Inside were documents exposing the Blackwoods' connection to unauthorized adoption schemes, along with a note: "Elizabeth trusted you with our son. I trust her judgment." The signature was a simple TC. Max's behavior around the mysterious watcher finally made sense. The dog had known all along. This was Thomas Carter, Oliver's father, who had never truly abandoned his family but had been working in the shadows to protect them. His medical work with disadvantaged communities had been a continuation of Elizabeth's mission, helping those who needed to disappear. As Sarah watched the figure fade into the darkness once again, she understood that Thomas wasn't just watching, he was guarding. gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to help them fight the forces threatening to tear their unconventional family apart. His presence wasn't a threat but a promise they weren't alone in this battle. The revelation about Sarah's connection to the Hendersons came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as she sorted through Oliver's documents before the next custody hearing. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between the pages, a 25-year-old story about a baby girl found abandoned at Fairview General Hospital. The article described how a local nurse discovered the infant wrapped in a distinctive blanket with the Henderson family crest. The baby was eventually adopted by the Matthews family from a neighboring town. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the date, March 15th, the day she had always celebrated as her birthday. "I should have recognized it sooner," Claire Thompson said when Sarah showed her the article. The elderly librarian pulled out a leather-bound album from her personal collection. "Look at this photograph of Elizabeth Henderson as a teenager. She used to volunteer at the hospital's pediatric ward, spending hours with one particular baby." The evidence was overwhelming. Hospital records from Sarah's early days matched the timing of Elizabeth's volunteer work. Notes in Elizabeth's old diary spoke of a precious little guardian she watched over, one who would someday understand her destiny. Even Sarah's inexplicable drive to protect others, which had cost her so dearly in Boston, suddenly made sense. Margaret Wilson, the retired nurse who had found Sarah that night, finally revealed the truth. "Elizabeth arranged everything," she confessed. "She made sure you were found, that the Matthews family was chosen. She said you had the heart of a true guardian, not because of blood, but because of who you were meant to become." Sarah discovered more connections as she dug deeper. Her adoptive parents had received anonymous financial support for her medical school education. Her placement at various hospitals had been subtly guided, leading her ultimately to Fairview. Even her wrongful dismissal in Boston had pushed her back to where Elizabeth seemed to want her all along. The most startling proof came from Max himself. The old dog led Sarah to a hidden compartment in her own attic, containing a letter Elizabeth had left years ago. "Dear Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, you found your way home. I've watched over you from afar, knowing someday you would be needed to protect another child the way you were once protected." The letter explained how Elizabeth had recognized something special in Sarah as a baby, a fierce determination to survive, a natural instinct to care for others. She had orchestrated Sarah's adoption not to abandon her but to give her a chance to develop these qualities away from the Henderson family's rigid expectations. "The true Henderson legacy isn't about bloodlines," Elizabeth wrote. "It's about the capacity to love and protect others without seeking power or recognition. You proved this through every choice you made, especially in Boston. What they saw as a weakness was actually your greatest strength." Sarah sat in Oliver's nursery that night, watching him sleep while Max kept his usual vigil. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Another baby left in the rain, another chance to continue a legacy of protection. She had been drawn to Oliver from the first moment, not just because of her own past, but because some part of her recognized what he represented. Claire brought one final piece of evidence, a photograph taken the day Sarah was found. In it, a much younger Elizabeth Henderson stood in the background, watching as Margaret Wilson carried the baby to safety. The expression on Elizabeth's face was the same one Sarah now wore when looking at Oliver, fierce protection mixed with unbearable love. "She never abandoned you," Claire explained softly. "She visited Fairview regularly, always finding ways to watch your progress. Even after she disappeared, she made sure you were guided to where you needed to be." The discovery of her true origins didn't change who Sarah was, but it illuminated the path that had led her to this moment. Her fight for Oliver wasn't just about protecting a child, it was about continuing a legacy of compassion that Elizabeth had seen in her from the beginning. Max seemed more relaxed after the truth emerged, as if relieved that this part of his mission was complete. His gentle eyes held a knowing look as Sarah processed her newfound identity, understanding now why Elizabeth had trusted him to watch over both her children, the one she had protected from afar, and the one she had been forced to leave behind. The kidnapping attempt came 3 days before the final custody hearing. Sarah had just finished her night shift and dawn was breaking over Fairview as she drove home. Max, who had taken to accompanying her to work, sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears perking up as they approached their street. Something was wrong. The front door of Sarah's house stood slightly ajar, and Claire Thompson, who had been watching Oliver, wasn't responding to calls. Max bolted from the car before Sarah could fully stop, his aged body moving with unexpected speed. The sound of breaking glass from inside spurred them both into action. They found Claire unconscious in the hallway, a small cut on her forehead. Two men in dark suits were in Oliver's nursery, one already holding the crying baby. The Blackwoods send their regards, the taller one sneered, reaching for his pocket. But Max was already moving, years of police training taking over. The old German shepherd launched himself at the man holding Oliver, his jaws clamping down on the attacker's arm. The sudden movement caused the kidnapper to lose his grip, and Sarah lunged forward to catch Oliver before he could fall. The second man pulled out a heavy flashlight, swinging it with vicious intent. Max took the full force of the blow to protect Sarah and Oliver, the sickening crack of impact echoing through the room. Despite the injury, he maintained his position between the attackers and his family, blood matting his gray fur. His legs trembled but held firm, a low growl rumbling from his chest. The sound of approaching sirens sent the intruders fleeing, but not before the second man landed another brutal kick to Max's ribs. The old dog collapsed only after the danger had passed, his breath coming in labored gasps. Sarah, still clutching Oliver, felt her heart breaking as she knelt beside her faithful protector. "Stay with me, Max," she pleaded, pulling out her phone to call Dr. James Anderson, the local veterinarian. Claire, who had regained consciousness, took Oliver while Sarah examined Max's injuries. The damage was severe: broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a possible skull fracture from the flashlight's impact. Dr. Anderson arrived within minutes, his face grave as he assessed Max. "He's strong," he said, carefully loading the injured dog into his van, but at his age, these injuries, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood the odds they were facing. The next 48 hours became a vigil at the veterinary clinic. Sarah divided her time between Max's bedside and caring for Oliver, who seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. The old dog's condition remained critical, his typically alert eyes dulled by pain and medication. Word of Max's heroism spread through Fairview. People began gathering outside the clinic, leaving flowers and cards. Even those who had once viewed him as just a stray now recognized the nobility of his sacrifice. Officer Jenkins, who had worked with Max during his canine days, stood guard at the clinic door, ensuring no one disturbed his former partner's rest. Thomas Carter emerged from the shadows during this crisis, his medical expertise proving invaluable. He worked alongside Dr. Anderson, bringing his human medical knowledge to help treat Max's injuries. "He protected my son," Thomas said quietly, his hands gentle as he changed Max's bandages, just as Elizabeth trusted him to do. The most touching moment came when Sarah brought Oliver to visit. The baby reached out toward his injured guardian, making distressed sounds until Sarah carefully laid him next to Max. The old dog's tail gave a feeble wag and his eyes regained some of their former brightness as Oliver patted his nose with tiny hands. Evidence from the attack proved crucial in the custody battle. Security cameras had captured the would-be kidnappers entering a car registered to the Blackwoods Security Company. Their violent methods exposed the true nature of their interest in Oliver, turning the tide of public opinion firmly in Sarah's favor. But none of that mattered to Sarah as she maintained her vigil by Max's side. She read to him from Elizabeth's letters, reminding him of his mission and begging him to hold on. "We need you," she whispered, stroking his graying muzzle. "Our guardian isn't finished yet." In the aftermath of the kidnapping attempt, Dr. Thomas Carter finally stepped out of the shadows. He arrived at the veterinary clinic carrying a worn medical bag and a lifetime of regret etched on his face. Sarah, exhausted from her vigil over Max, found him standing in the doorway of the treatment room, his eyes fixed on Oliver sleeping in her arms. "I should have been here sooner," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Elizabeth always said Max would protect them until I found my courage." He approached slowly, as if afraid the scene before him might dissolve into another dream. Oliver stirred in his sleep, instinctively turning toward his father's voice. The story spilled out as they sat beside Max's bed. Thomas had met Elizabeth during his residency at Fairview General, their shared passion for helping others drawing them together. Their love blossomed in secret, stolen moments between hospital rounds and Henderson family obligations. When Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant, they had planned to run away together. But her father found out, Thomas explained, gently checking Max's vital signs. He threatened to destroy my medical career to ensure I'd never practice again. Elizabeth knew that would destroy everything we'd worked for, all the free clinics we planned to establish, all the people we could help. His hands trembled as he adjusted Max's bandages. Instead of running, they had made an impossible choice. Elizabeth would disappear alone, protecting both the baby and Thomas's ability to continue their work. She used the Henderson resources to help him establish clinics in underserved communities, creating safe havens for those needing to escape dangerous situations. Each clinic became part of a network of protection, continuing the true Henderson legacy in their own way. I never stopped watching over you both, he told Oliver, who had wakened and was studying his father with curious eyes. Every time the Blackwoods made a move, I gathered evidence. Every free clinic I opened weakened their influence. Elizabeth and I communicated through our work, knowing someday we could make things right. Sarah witnessed the moment Oliver first reached for his father, tiny fingers grasping Thomas's larger hand. The resemblance between them was striking, the same determined set of their jaw, the same compassionate eyes. Max, despite his injuries, lifted his head to watch the reunion, his tail offering a weak but approving wag. Thomas's emergence proved timely beyond the emotional reunion. His years of documenting the Blackwoods' illegal activities provided the evidence needed to challenge their custody claim. His testimony about Elizabeth's plan to protect their son until both the legal and personal threads of their lives could be rewoven carried the weight of 2 decades patient waiting. Elizabeth knew the risks, he explained to the judge in chambers. She chose Sarah as Oliver's guardian because she recognized in her the same spirit that drove our work, the desire to protect others, regardless of personal cost. His words, backed by years of documented service to underserved communities, proved difficult to dismiss. The most poignant moment came when Thomas shared Elizabeth's final message to him, delivered through one of their clinic networks just months before Oliver's appearance in Fairview. Our son will find his way home, she had written. Not to the Henderson name, but to those who understand what it truly means to be a guardian. Watch over him, but let him find his path as we found ours. Sarah watched as Thomas carefully tended to Max's injuries, the doctor's skilled hands gentle on the old dog's wounds. Elizabeth always said Max would know when it was time to bring our family together again, he mused. She trusted him to recognize the right guardian for Oliver, to know when I was ready to step forward. The presence of Oliver's father changed the dynamics of their unusual family in unexpected ways. Rather than complicating Sarah's guardianship, Thomas supported it wholeheartedly, understanding that Oliver needed both the mother who had chosen him and the father who had waited so long to claim him. As Max slowly recovered under Thomas's care, their little family began to heal as well. The old dog seemed more peaceful now, as if the final piece of his mission had fallen into place. He watched contentedly as father and son bonded, as Sarah and Thomas learned to co-parent, as the true meaning of Elizabeth's legacy took shape in their growing understanding of what makes a family. The attempted kidnapping and Max's injury galvanized Fairview in unexpected ways. What began as a small group of supporters grew into a community-wide movement to protect Sarah and Oliver. Claire Thompson was the first to take action, organizing a schedule of volunteers to watch over Sarah's house in shifts, ensuring they were never alone. This town has been silent too long, Claire declared at an impromptu meeting in the library's back room. The Hendersons protected us for generations. Now it's our turn to protect their legacy. One by one, residents came forward with stories of how the Henderson family had helped them or their loved ones in times of crisis. Margaret Wilson revealed how Elizabeth had helped her escape an abusive marriage 20 years ago, providing her with a new identity in a nursing position at Fairview General. She didn't just save my life, Margaret testified at a custody hearing. She showed me how to rebuild it. That's what Sarah does every day for her patients, and that's what she's doing for Oliver. The town's shopkeepers formed their own protection network. Mrs. Chin at the grocery store kept her security cameras running constantly, documenting any suspicious vehicles or strangers. Old Mr. Patterson, whose hardware store overlooked Sarah's route to work, installed extra lighting along the street. Even the local teenagers took turns walking Max when Sarah was at work, once he began recovering. Officer Jenkins, who had worked with Max during his K-9 days, stationed patrol cars near Sarah's house during his off-duty hours. "That dog saved my life twice when we were partners," he explained. "Standing watch is the least I can do to repay him." Other officers followed his lead, creating an unofficial security detail that made the Blackwoods surveillance increasingly difficult. Dr. Anderson, the veterinarian, refused payment for Max's treatment, saying the old dog had earned lifetime care through his service to the town. His waiting room became an unofficial headquarters where supporters gathered to share information and coordinate their efforts. The walls filled with children's drawings of Max, cards for Oliver, and photos of Elizabeth's volunteer work at the hospital. Sarah's colleagues at Fairview General rallied around her as well. Nurses adjusted their schedules to ensure she always had backup childcare during her shifts. Dr. Patricia Chan, the chief of pediatrics, publicly challenged the Blackwoods' claims about Sarah's fitness as a guardian. "I've watched her save children others had given up on," she testified. "Her supposed excessive emotional attachment to patients is exactly what makes her an exceptional doctor and mother." The most touching support came from the families Elizabeth and Thomas had helped through their clinic network. They began arriving in Fairview, sharing stories of how the couple's work had given them new lives. A local lawyer whose family had been helped by the Hendersons years ago took on Sarah's case pro bono, building a formidable defense against the Blackwoods' legal attacks. Local business owner Robert Martinez organized a fundraiser for Sarah's legal expenses, though he'd never spoken to her before. During the event, he revealed how Elizabeth had helped his parents establish their restaurant after they fled political persecution. "This town was built on second chances," he said. "Sarah and Oliver deserve theirs." The town's children played their part too. They created a hand-drawn book of Max's adventures, selling copies to raise money for his medical care. The stories, imaginative and touching, portrayed the old dog as a silent guardian who had watched over them all. Their parents realized the truth in these tales: how many times Max had appeared at just the right moment to prevent accidents or guide lost children home. Even those who had initially doubted Sarah began to change their minds. The hospital administrator who had questioned her work schedule now defended her publicly. "Dr. Matthews represents the best traditions of medical care," he stated in a letter to the court. Her dedication to Oliver mirrors her commitment to all her patients, total and unwavering. The community's support culminated in a candlelight vigil outside the courthouse during the final custody hearing. Hundreds of Fairview residents gathered, holding signs with photos of Max's years of service, Elizabeth's charitable work, and Sarah's care for Oliver. The message was clear: this child belonged not just to Sarah but to a community ready to protect him. Thomas Carter, watching from the courthouse steps, saw in this gathering the fulfillment of his and Elizabeth's dream: a community united in protecting those in need, not for power or influence but out of genuine care and compassion. The Blackwoods' expensive lawyers and political connections seemed insignificant against this display of grassroots support. As Sarah walked through the crowd with Oliver in her arms, followed by a recovering Max, neighbors reached out to touch her shoulders, offer encouragement, or simply nod in solidarity. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore; it had become Fairview's declaration of independence from those who would use power to separate families. The discovery of Elizabeth's diaries began when Max, still recovering from his injuries, led Sarah and Thomas to a loose floorboard in the old Henderson manor. Beneath it lay a collection of leather-bound journals, their pages filled with Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. Each volume revealed another layer of her carefully orchestrated plan to protect Oliver and preserve the true Henderson legacy. The earliest entries dated back to Elizabeth's teenage years, documenting her growing disillusionment with her family's increasing focus on power and influence. "Father speaks of protection," she wrote, "but his actions speak of control. The true meaning of being a guardian is slipping away from us." Her words resonated with Sarah's own experiences of choosing compassion over protocol. Thomas found the entries about their first meeting particularly moving. "Today I met someone who understands," Elizabeth had written. "Dr. Carter sees patients not as cases to be managed, but as lives to be protected. He reminds me of what our family once stood for." Their love story unfolded through pages of hidden meetings and shared dreams of helping others. The most revealing entries came from Elizabeth's pregnancy. She detailed her decision to leave, not just to protect Oliver from her family's manipulation, but to ensure he would grow up understanding the real meaning of the Henderson legacy. My son will learn guardianship not from family teachings, but by witnessing true protection in action. Sarah will show him what I cannot. Claire Thompson helped piece together the timeline hidden in Elizabeth's writings. The journals revealed an intricate network of allies Elizabeth had cultivated: nurses, teachers, shopkeepers, all watching over Sarah as she grew up. She never stopped being your guardian, Claire explained to Sarah. She just found a way to protect you from a distance. Some entries were written directly to Oliver, a mother's love poured onto pages she knew she might never share with her son. My darling boy. One letter began, when you read this you'll be surrounded by people who understand what it means to protect others. Your father's courage, Sarah's compassion, Max's loyalty, these are your true inheritance, worth more than any Henderson fortune. The diaries also contained warnings about the Blackwoods and others who sought to control the Henderson legacy. Elizabeth had documented their attempts to identify and acquire children with the family birthmark, believing it would give them claim to the Henderson resources. Her careful documentation became crucial evidence in the custody battle. One journal held particular significance: Elizabeth's medical diary from her final months. The entries revealed her terminal diagnosis and her race against time to ensure Oliver's future. The hardest part isn't leaving, she wrote, but trusting that all the pieces will fall into place without me. Yet when I see Sarah with her patience, I know I've chosen well. She'll give Oliver what my family couldn't give me: the freedom to become his own kind of guardian. Max featured prominently in the later entries. Elizabeth had spent months training him, teaching him to recognize Sarah, to protect Oliver, to understand when the time would be right to bring Thomas back into their lives. This loyal friend, she wrote, sees more clearly than any human the bonds that make a true family. He'll know when hearts are ready to heal. Sarah found entries about herself that brought tears to her eyes. Elizabeth had followed her career from afar, celebrating her successes and hurting for her setbacks. The entry from the day of Sarah's dismissal from Boston Metropolitan was particularly poignant. Today, my dear girl learned the hardest lesson of being a guardian, that sometimes protecting others comes at great personal cost. But this path will lead her home, where she'll find the family she was meant to protect. Through these pages, Elizabeth's presence became real to them all. Her voice, preserved in ink and paper, guided them through their doubts and fears. Even her description of the Henderson birthmark took on new meaning. It's not a mark of ownership, she wrote, but a reminder that some are born with a deeper capacity for compassion, a natural instinct to protect. Oliver and Sarah share this gift, though they carry it in different ways. The final entry, dated just weeks before Oliver's arrival at the hospital, read like a benediction: my time grows short, but my heart is at peace. I've seen the threads of love and protection weaving together: Sarah's strength, Thomas's dedication, Max's loyalty, and our precious Oliver, who will unite them all. The true Henderson legacy isn't in our name or our wealth, but in the simple act of choosing to protect others, no matter the cost. As Sarah closed the last journal, she felt Elizabeth's presence more strongly than ever. These weren't just diary entries, they were a mother's roadmap to love, a guardian's guide to protection, and a visionary's blueprint for preserving what truly mattered in the Henderson legacy. The final custody hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 6 months after Max had brought Oliver to the hospital. The Fairview courthouse buzzed with tension as Sarah faced her greatest challenge yet. The Blackwoods had brought in a team of high-powered lawyers, their expensive suits and confident smirks a stark contrast to Sarah's simple doctor's attire. Your Honor, the Blackwoods' lead attorney began, Dr. Matthews, while well-intentioned, lacks the stability and resources to raise this child properly. Her history of emotional decisions, her irregular work hours, and her single status make her an unsuitable guardian. He presented a stack of documents detailing Sarah's dismissal from Boston Metropolitan, painting her compassion as a professional liability. Sarah's own testimony came from the heart. I understand what it means to be abandoned and found, she said, her voice steady despite her fears. Like Oliver, I was left at a hospital, but I was blessed with people who chose to protect me. Now I'm choosing to protect him. She described their daily routines, the support network that had formed around them, and the profound bond they shared. Thomas Carter's appearance in court caused a sensation. He presented evidence of the Blackwoods' attempts to acquire other children with the Henderson birthmark, revealing their true motives. They don't want to protect Oliver, he declared. They want to control what he represents, the true Henderson legacy of protecting others. The most damaging testimony against the Blackwoods came from unexpected sources. Former employees detailed their aggressive searches for children with similar birthmarks. Hospital staff from other cities described suspicious adoptions that had been quickly and quietly arranged. The pattern was clear: this was about power, not parenthood. Elizabeth's diaries proved crucial to the case. Her detailed documentation of the Blackwoods' activities, combined with her explicit wishes for Oliver's future, carried significant weight with Judge Parker. The entries describing Sarah's own connection to the Henderson legacy of protection helped establish a deeper legitimacy to her guardianship. The Blackwoods fought back ruthlessly. They brought in child development experts to question the stability of Oliver's unusual home environment. They highlighted Sarah's night shifts, suggesting she couldn't provide consistent care. They even tried to paint Max as a danger to the child despite his heroic protection during the kidnapping attempt. Claire Thompson's testimony about Elizabeth's long-term plan proved pivotal. She described how Elizabeth had watched over Sarah from afar, recognizing in her the qualities of a true guardian. Elizabeth chose Sarah long before Oliver arrived, Claire explained. She saw someone who would protect not just her son but the real meaning of what it means to be a Henderson. The community's support manifested in powerful ways during the proceedings. The courthouse steps filled with Fairview residents holding signs supporting Sarah's guardianship. Letters poured in from families Elizabeth and Thomas had helped through their clinic network, all testifying to the importance of choosing love over power in protecting children. Max's presence in the courthouse, still bearing the scars of his protection, served as a silent but powerful reminder of the true meaning of guardianship. He lay quietly at Sarah's feet during the proceedings, occasionally reaching out to touch Oliver with his nose when the baby grew restless. The turning point came when Dr. Patricia Chan presented Oliver's medical records alongside Elizabeth's. The birthmark these people are so interested in, she explained, appears in those with an inherited capacity for empathy and protection. Dr. Matthews shares this trait not through blood but through her natural instinct to protect others, exactly what Elizabeth Henderson wanted for her son. On the final day of testimony, Sarah stood before the court one last time. I can't offer Oliver the wealth or social status the Blackwoods promised, she admitted. But I can offer him something more valuable, the understanding that family isn't about power or control. It's about choosing to protect those we love, even when that choice comes at a personal cost. Judge Parker's decision, when it finally came, acknowledged the unique circumstances of the case. The court finds that Dr. Sarah Matthews, with the support of Dr. Thomas Carter, has demonstrated not just the ability but the deep understanding required to raise this child in accordance with his heritage of protection and service to others. As Sarah left the courthouse with Oliver in her arms, Max walking proudly beside them despite his healing injuries, she felt Elizabeth's presence in the autumn breeze. They had done more than win a custody battle, they had preserved the true meaning of what it meant to be a guardian of hope. The Blackwoods made their final desperate move on a foggy night 3 weeks after losing the custody battle. Sarah had just finished a grueling emergency surgery and was driving home, with Max dozing in the passenger seat. The old dog suddenly jerked awake, his body tensing as they turned onto their street. Something was wrong. The first sign was Oliver's nursery light. It was off when it should have been on. Claire was staying over and she always kept it lit. Sarah's heart dropped when she saw the side door slightly ajar, its lock cleanly picked. Before she could reach for her phone, Max had already bolted from the car, his aging body moving with unexpected urgency. Sarah's whispered call was met with silence. They found the elderly librarian unconscious near the stairs, a small gash on her forehead. The sound of multiple footsteps came from upstairs, along with Oliver's muffled crying. Max took the stairs 2 at a time, with Sarah close behind. 3 men in dark suits were in the nursery. The largest held Oliver while another was hastily packing a bag. The third man, whom Sarah recognized as the Blackwoods head of security, stood blocking the doorway. Mrs. Blackwood sends her regards, he sneered. She says some people don't know when they've lost. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Max launched himself at the man holding Oliver, years of police training evident in his precise attack. His teeth found the man's arm, forcing him to release the baby. Sarah lunged forward, catching Oliver before he could fall. The second man pulled out a metal baton, swinging it with vicious force. Max took the full impact to protect Sarah and Oliver, the crack of the baton against his ribs echoing through the room. Despite the devastating blow, he maintained his defensive position, blood matting his gray fur. His legs trembled but held firm as he faced the attackers, his body a living shield between them and his family. "Get out of the way, you stupid dog," the security head growled, pulling out a taser. Max's response was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from his very soul. Though injured, he began herding Sarah and Oliver toward the door, never turning his back on the threats. The arrival of police sirens sent the intruders scrambling, but not before the man with the baton landed one final, brutal kick to Max's side. The old dog held his ground until the last attacker fled, then collapsed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Only then did he allow himself to show his pain, whimpering softly as Sarah knelt beside him. Officer Jenkins arrived first. Having been alerted by the security system Sarah had installed after the custody battle, he found Sarah cradling both Oliver and Max's head, tears streaming down her face as she tried to assess the dog's injuries. "Stay with us," she whispered to Max. "We need you, old friend. Please stay." Thomas arrived minutes later, having been called by Claire after she regained consciousness. His medical training, though meant for humans, proved invaluable as he worked to stabilize Max until the veterinary ambulance arrived. "His pulse is weak," he muttered, hands gentle on the dog's broken body. "But his heart is still fighting." The move to the animal hospital was delicate and desperate. Max's injuries were severe: broken ribs, internal bleeding, and possible spinal damage from the baton strike. Dr. Anderson worked through the night, his skilled hands racing against time to save the loyal guardian. Sarah refused to leave, dividing her attention between comforting Oliver and watching Max's vital signs. Throughout the night, Max's condition remained critical. Yet even in his sedated state, he would stir whenever Oliver cried, trying to fulfill his protective duties despite his injuries. The sight broke the hearts of the hospital staff, who had all heard stories of the old dog's years of silent guardianship over their town. Dawn brought a community mobilized by word of the attack. People gathered outside the veterinary clinic, holding vigil for their faithful protector. Children left drawings and letters, telling stories of times Max had appeared just when they needed help. Former K-9 officers came to stand guard, honoring their fallen comrade. The most powerful moment came when Officer Jenkins brought in Max's old police medal of valor, carefully pinning it to the blanket covering the injured dog. "You never stopped serving," he said gruffly, fighting back tears. "You just found a different way to protect us all." Thomas found evidence in the nursery later that day, a dropped phone containing messages that directly linked the attack to the Blackwoods. But as he shared this information with the police, his eyes kept returning to the clinic's treatment room, where his son slept safely in Sarah's arms, guarded even now by a dog who had given everything to protect them. The night's events had demonstrated the true meaning of Elizabeth's teachings about protection. It wasn't about power or control, but about the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you love. Max had embodied this principle his entire life, and now he had proved it in the most profound way possible. In the aftermath of the kidnapping attempt, while Max fought for his life at the veterinary clinic, Claire Thompson arrived with a weathered wooden box she'd discovered hidden in the library's basement. "Elizabeth left this with me years ago," she explained, her hands trembling. She said to open it only when the true meaning of guardianship was revealed through sacrifice. Inside the box lay a collection of documents that would change their understanding of the Henderson legacy forever. The oldest was a letter dated 1932, written by Elizabeth's great-grandmother, Margaret Henderson, during the depths of the Great Depression. It described how she had transformed their family mansion into a secret refuge for families who had lost everything, protecting them from those who would exploit their desperation. "We have wealth enough to share," Margaret had written, "but more importantly, we have the power to protect those who cannot protect themselves. This is our true purpose, not to accumulate power, but to shelter hope." The letter detailed how she had created a network of safe houses throughout the county, using the family's resources to help people rebuild their lives. Sarah read these revelations aloud to Oliver and Max in the veterinary clinic, the old dog's tail offering weak wags at significant passages. Each generation of Hendersons had added to the legacy in their own way. Elizabeth's grandfather had sheltered refugees during World War II. Her mother had created scholarships for children escaping abusive homes. The birthmark they all shared wasn't a mark of power, it was a reminder of responsibility. Thomas found records of his own connection to this legacy. Elizabeth had recognized in him the same protective instinct that had defined the best of her family's heritage. His free clinics, unknown to him, had become part of the modern Henderson network, offering medical care and safe passage to those in desperate situations. The Blackwoods never understood, Claire explained, showing them more documents. They saw the birthmark as a sign of authority, of control over others. But Elizabeth knew better. She saw it in you, Sarah. The true spirit of guardianship isn't in blood, but in the choices we make to protect others. The most revealing document was Elizabeth's final letter to Oliver, written as she faced her terminal diagnosis. "My darling boy," she wrote, "you carry our family's mark, but your true inheritance is the capacity to love and protect others. Sarah will show you this through her actions, just as she showed me through her care for her patients. Your father demonstrates it through his dedication to healing. Even Max, our faithful guardian, embodies this legacy more purely than any Henderson by blood." Photos spilled from the box, decades of lives touched by the Henderson legacy. Children who had grown up to become teachers, doctors, and protectors themselves. Families who had found new beginnings through the network's help. Each image told a story of hope preserved through difficult times. Among these was a photograph Sarah had never seen, Elizabeth holding her as a baby in the hospital. The same tender expression she now wore when looking at Oliver. "She chose you long ago," Claire said softly, "because she saw in you the purest expression of what our family was meant to be." The documents revealed how Elizabeth had worked to protect the network from those who would corrupt it. The Blackwoods had discovered partial records of the Henderson legacy and attempted to take control, seeing only the power and not the responsibility. Elizabeth's careful planning, including choosing Sarah as Oliver's guardian and trusting Max to watch over them both, was her way of ensuring the legacy would survive in its truest form. A series of letters between Elizabeth and Thomas showed how they had continued their work separately but united in purpose. Each free clinic he opened, every person Sarah helped, all of Max's years of silent guardianship, these were the real fruits of the Henderson legacy, more valuable than any fortune. The final piece was a deed to Henderson Manor, modified by Elizabeth before her death. She had transformed it into a trust, to be managed by those who understood true guardianship. The mansion would become a haven again, as it had been in Margaret Henderson's time, not just a symbol of wealth but a sanctuary for those in need of protection. As Sarah finished reading these revelations, she looked at Oliver sleeping peacefully in his carrier, at Max's steady gaze despite his injuries, at Thomas's thoughtful expression. They had become exactly what Elizabeth had hoped for, a family bound not by blood or power but by their shared commitment to protecting others. The true purpose of the Henderson legacy wasn't to maintain a dynasty or accumulate influence. It was to ensure that there would always be guardians ready to protect those in need, to offer hope when all seemed lost. Through Sarah, Thomas, Oliver, and even Max, this legacy would continue, not as a burden of blood but as a choice made freely out of love. The Blackwoods' attack on Sarah's home ignited a firestorm they hadn't anticipated. The morning after Max's injury, Fairview's residents gathered in the town square, their anger and determination palpable. Claire Thompson stood on the courthouse steps, holding documents that revealed decades of the Blackwoods' attempts to exploit vulnerable families. "For years they've tried to corrupt what the Hendersons built," Claire announced to the crowd. "They've used their wealth to silence witnesses, buy influence, and twist the meaning of protection into control. But today we say no more." Her voice, usually soft from years among library shelves, rang with unexpected strength. Robert Martinez, whose restaurant had become a meeting place for supporters, revealed how the Blackwoods had attempted to pressure him into spying on Sarah and Oliver. "They offered to buy my business, to solve all my financial problems," he testified to the police. "All I had to do was help them get close to the baby. But some things aren't for sale, like integrity and community." Dr. Patricia Chan brought forward medical records showing how the Blackwoods had tried to manipulate other adoptions targeting children with birthmarks similar to Oliver's. Hospital staff from 3 states testified about mysterious consultants who had offered bribes for information about specific infants. The pattern was clear and damning. Officer Jenkins organized his fellow police officers into a volunteer protection detail for Sarah's house. Max protected this town for years, he declared during a community meeting. Now, it's our turn to stand guard. They uncovered evidence linking the Blackwoods security team to several suspicious accidents involving people who had opposed their plans. The local newspaper, run by veteran journalist Martha Stevens, published a comprehensive expose of the Blackwoods' activities. Behind the facade, 20 years of corruption detailed how they had systematically attempted to build their own twisted version of the Henderson Network, using money and fear instead of compassion and protection. Parents whose children had been watched over by Max during his years of guardianship organized a protest outside the Blackwoods corporate offices. They carried signs showing the old dog's picture alongside stories of how he had appeared at crucial moments to prevent accidents or guide lost children home. "This is true protection," their signs read. "Not your kind of control." Thomas Carter's free clinics became gathering points for families sharing their own experiences with the Blackwoods' manipulation. Stories emerged of pressure tactics, threats, and attempts to buy silence. Each testimony added to the legal case building against them, proving that their interest in Oliver was part of a larger pattern of exploitation. The town council, led by members whose families had been helped by the Henderson Network generations ago, passed emergency measures to protect vulnerable residents from corporate harassment. They established a legal defense fund for families facing similar pressure, naming it the Max's Guardian Fund in honor of the injured dog's sacrifice. Sarah's hospital colleagues organized a medical support network, ensuring that families who stood up to the Blackwoods would have access to care without fear of financial pressure. Dr. Chen coordinated with other hospitals to document and protect records that might be targeted for manipulation or destruction. Even the children of Fairview played their part. They created a wall of drawings in the town square, each depicting a moment when Max or the Henderson legacy had touched their lives. These innocent testimonies to the power of true protection proved more damaging to the Blackwoods' reputation than any corporate investigation. The decisive moment came when Claire discovered Elizabeth's hidden records of the Blackwoods' first attempts to infiltrate the Henderson Network. The documents showed how they had systematically targeted families in crisis, offering help with strings attached, building a database of obligations they could later exploit. Faced with mounting evidence and community resistance, the Blackwoods' carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Their corporate allies distanced themselves, their political connections grew silent, and their legal team struggled to counter the wave of testimonies about their true nature. But the community's stand wasn't just about opposition, it was about reclaiming the true meaning of protection. As the Blackwoods' influence waned, Henderson Manor was restored to its original purpose. Volunteers helped renovate the old mansion, transforming it back into a haven for those in need of shelter and support. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Junior employees of the Blackwoods-owned corporation, inspired by the community's courage, began sharing internal documents showing the full scope of corruption. The evidence they provided led to multiple criminal investigations, effectively ending the Blackwoods' ability to threaten anyone else. Fairview had shown that true strength lies not in wealth or power but in a community's united stand for what's right. They had protected not just Oliver and Sarah but the very meaning of guardianship that Elizabeth Henderson had fought to preserve. Day 5 after the attack, and Max's condition took a devastating turn. Dr. Anderson found Sarah in the clinic's waiting room at dawn, his face grave. "The internal bleeding has resumed," he explained gently. "His age makes surgery extremely risky, but without it, he didn't need to finish the sentence." Sarah understood they were losing him. The clinic had become a vigil site. Officers from Max's K-9 unit days took turns sitting with him, sharing stories of his service years. Even as a police dog, he was different, Officer Jenkins recalled, stroking Max's graying muzzle. He didn't just catch criminals, he seemed to understand when someone needed help rather than arrest. Thomas brought Oliver for daily visits, knowing Max responded best to the baby's presence. The old dog's tail would wag weakly when Oliver touched his nose, but his once alert eyes were growing dimmer. The effort to track Oliver's movements seemed to drain what little strength he had left. Sarah refused to leave Max's side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed. She read to him from Elizabeth's journals, reminding him of his mission and the lives he'd touched. "You brought us together," she whispered during one particularly difficult night. "You can't leave us now. We're not finished becoming a family." Dr. Anderson prepared them for the worst. "His heart is strong," he explained, "but the trauma was severe. The fact that he's held on this long is remarkable." The x-rays showed the extent of damage: multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, severe trauma to his spine. Each breath seemed to cost him more effort than the last. The children of Fairview created a wall of get-well cards in the clinic's waiting room. Their crayon drawing showed Max as they remembered him standing guard at school crossings, appearing mysteriously when they were lost or scared, watching over their games in the park. Each story revealed another thread of his years of silent protection. Claire brought a photograph she'd found in Elizabeth's papers: Max as a young dog standing proud in his police uniform. "He was born to be a guardian," she said softly. "First as a police dog, then for Elizabeth, and finally for you and Oliver. He's lived his purpose fully." The hardest moment came when Max tried to stand during one of Oliver's visits, his protective instincts fighting against his failing body. The effort sent him into a crisis, his breathing becoming labored as Dr. Anderson and his team rushed to stabilize him. Sarah held Oliver close, tears streaming down her face as she watched their faithful guardian struggle. Throughout his decline, Max maintained his vigil as best he could. Even in his weakened state, his eyes would track any movement near Oliver's carrier, his ears would prick at unfamiliar sounds. The effort clearly cost him, but he refused to relinquish his protective duties. "He's still trying to guard," as Thomas observed, watching Max's futile attempts to lift his head when people entered the room. "Even now, he won't let go of his mission." The old dog's dedication was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a final lesson in what it meant to be a true guardian. As Max's condition deteriorated, Sarah faced the possibility of losing another member of her newfound family. The old dog had been more than a protector. He had been the bridge between past and present, the living link to Elizabeth's legacy, and the catalyst that had brought them all together. While Max fought for his life, the Blackwoods launched their final legal assault. Their lawyers filed an emergency petition claiming the attack on Sarah's home proved she couldn't provide a safe environment for Oliver. Judge Parker, under intense pressure from political connections, ordered a temporary removal hearing. The courthouse scene was heartbreaking. Sarah stood clutching Oliver, her face pale but composed, as social services prepared to take him. "It's just temporary," her lawyer assured her, but the doubt in his eyes betrayed his words. The Blackwoods had somehow managed to freeze most of the evidence against them, leaving Sarah vulnerable to their claims about her unsafe home environment. "Dr. Matthews has demonstrated a pattern of attracting danger," their lawyer argued smoothly. "First in Boston, now here. The child deserves a stable, secure environment." Each word felt like a physical blow, twisting Sarah's past dedication to helping others into evidence against her fitness as a mother. Thomas watched helplessly as the proceedings unfolded. His testimony about the Blackwoods' true motives was ruled inadmissible on technical grounds. The judge seemed to avoid meeting his eyes as she announced her decision to temporarily place Oliver in state custody pending a full investigation. The moment they took Oliver from Sarah's arms was devastating. The baby, sensing her distress, began crying inconsolably. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her arms empty, as social services carried him away. The Blackwoods watched from across the courtroom, their satisfied smiles barely concealed. Claire Thompson broke down in tears, knowing how this would affect Max's will to live. "He held on to protect Oliver," she sobbed. "How do we tell him he failed?" The old dog's condition seemed to worsen, as if he somehow sensed that his charge had been taken away. The community's support, though unwavering, couldn't overcome the legal machinery the Blackwoods had set in motion. Sarah's house, once filled with Oliver's presence, fell silent. She continued her vigil at Max's bedside, both of them seemingly diminished by the absence of the child they had fought so hard to protect. Dr. Chan found Sarah at the veterinary clinic late one night, clutching one of Oliver's blankets. They're going to let the Blackwoods foster him during the investigation, she revealed quietly. They've already filed for emergency adoption rights. The news felt like the final defeat in a battle they had thought they were winning. The local press, despite their support for Sarah, was forced to report on the court's decision. The headlines seemed to mock their earlier optimism: child removed from doctor's care after security concerns, and wealthy family offers safe haven for endangered child. Each story twisted the truth a little further. Thomas threw himself into gathering new evidence, working through sleepless nights to find a way to counter the Blackwoods' legal maneuvers. But with Oliver already in state custody and the adoption proceedings expedited, time was running out. The system that was meant to protect children was being used to separate a family. Sarah continued her hospital shifts, but her colleagues noticed the light had gone from her eyes. She moved like a shadow through the emergency room, still caring for her patients but without the passionate energy that had once defined her. The double loss of Oliver and potentially Max seemed to have broken something essential inside her. Sometimes protection means letting go. Claire tried to console her, but Sarah refused to accept defeat. Elizabeth didn't give up, she responded firmly. She found another way to protect what mattered. There has to be something we've missed, some piece of the puzzle we haven't seen yet. The truth about Elizabeth's final battle came to light in the darkest hour of their struggle. Claire found a sealed envelope in the library's archives, marked to be opened when all seems lost. Inside was Elizabeth's private medical journal, documenting her fight against an aggressive form of cancer while preparing Oliver's future. The entries revealed her race against time. 6 months, she had written. The doctors give me 6 months to ensure my son's safety. Every day counts now. The pages chronicled her methodical planning: choosing Sarah, training Max, documenting the Blackwoods' corruption, all while undergoing grueling treatments that offered no real hope of cure. Thomas read the journal with tears streaming down his face. She never told me, he whispered. All those years I thought she left to protect me, but she was protecting everyone from her pain. The entries showed how Elizabeth had used her remaining strength to dismantle the corrupt elements of her family's legacy, while preserving its true purpose. Dr. Chen confirmed the diagnosis through old hospital records. Elizabeth had rejected aggressive treatment options that might have extended her life, choosing instead to remain clear-headed enough to complete her plans. She knew she was trading time for certainty, Dr. Chen explained. Every decision was focused on Oliver's future. The most heart-wrenching entries were Elizabeth's letters to Oliver, written in increasingly unsteady handwriting. My darling boy. One began, I won't see you grow up, but I'm making sure you'll be surrounded by love. Sarah will give you the strength to be kind. Your father will show you how to heal others. And Max, faithful Max, will guard your heart until it's strong enough to guard others. The final entry, dated just weeks before Oliver's arrival at the hospital, revealed the depth of Elizabeth's foresight. She had known the Blackwoods would make their move, had anticipated their legal maneuvers. But she had also left one final safeguard, a truth so carefully hidden that even its revelation had to wait for the perfect moment. Sarah found herself reading these passages to Max in his hospital bed, understanding now why Elizabeth had trusted him so completely. The old dog had been her constant companion through the worst of her illness, watching as she prepared each piece of her plan, carrying the weight of her secret until the right time came. Elizabeth's last words in the journal were both a confession and a promise. I'm leaving this world too soon, but I'm leaving behind a family forged by choice rather than blood. They will face trials I cannot protect them from. But together they will discover the true strength of the legacy I entrust to them. The final piece of Elizabeth's plan revealed itself in an unexpected way. As Sarah sat reading Elizabeth's medical journal to Max at the veterinary clinic, Claire burst in with a leather album she'd found hidden behind the library's false wall. Look at your birthmark, she gasped, opening the album to a faded photograph. The image showed Sarah as a newborn, being examined by a young Elizabeth Henderson. There on Sarah's shoulder was a faint crescent mark identical to Oliver's but had faded with time. More photographs followed, documenting Elizabeth's secret guardianship of Sarah throughout her childhood. You weren't just chosen, Claire explained, her voice trembling with emotion. You were born to this legacy, just like Oliver. Elizabeth found you first, protected you by arranging your adoption to the Matthews family, and guided your path from afar. Journal entries revealed how Elizabeth had recognized the birthmark as a sign that the Henderson Guardian line had branched in an unexpected direction. Sarah's hand shook as she read Elizabeth's notes about her early years. The child shows extraordinary empathy, one entry read. Even as an infant she responds to others' distress. The birthmark may be fading, but the guardian spirit grows stronger. Each major decision in Sarah's life, her interest in medicine, her choice of hospitals, even her move to Fairview, had been gently influenced by Elizabeth's invisible guidance. Dr. Chen brought forward Sarah's old medical records, comparing them with Oliver's and Elizabeth's. The genetic markers are identical, she confirmed. You're not just Oliver's chosen guardian, you're part of the Henderson bloodline, probably from a branch of the family that chose to step away from wealth and power generations ago. The revelation explains so much: Sarah's instinctive need to protect others, her inability to ignore those in need, the immediate bond she'd formed with Oliver. Even her dismissal from Boston Metropolitan took on new meaning. She had acted as a true Henderson guardian, putting protection above protocol. Max's reaction to the news was remarkable. Despite his weakened state, he lifted his head and gave a soft whine of recognition. He had known somehow from their first meeting. Elizabeth's training had taught him to recognize not just the physical birthmark but the spirit of guardianship it represented. Thomas found records in Elizabeth's papers showing how she had tracked Sarah's Henderson ancestry. She spent years researching, he explained, making sure you were protected while allowing you to develop your guardian instincts naturally, away from the family's wealth and expectations. Among Elizabeth's final papers was a letter addressed to Sarah, meant for this moment: my dear girl, if you're reading this, you've discovered your true heritage. I protected you from afar, watching you grow into exactly the guardian I knew you could be. Now you understand why Oliver needed you specifically, not just as a mother, but as proof that the Henderson legacy of protection runs deeper than wealth or social position. The timing of this revelation was crucial. The Blackwoods' claim to Oliver rested partly on their connection to the Henderson name and fortune. But Sarah's newly discovered heritage, combined with her proven record of protective guardianship, offered a powerful counter to their legal arguments. Sarah stared at her reflection in the clinic's window, touching the spot where her birthmark had once been visible. She wasn't just fighting for custody anymore, she was reclaiming a legacy that had been part of her identity all along. Elizabeth had known that someday both her children, Sarah and Oliver, would need to understand their shared heritage to protect each other. As Sarah's true heritage came to light, Thomas Carter finally revealed the full extent of his years of secret protection. He shared with Sarah a worn leather journal he'd kept since leaving Fairview, documenting every step he'd taken to watch over both her and Oliver from the shadows. Elizabeth told me about you before she died, he explained, showing Sarah entries dating back to her time in medical school. She made me promise to be your invisible guardian while she watched over you openly. The journal detailed how he had quietly influenced hospital boards, ensured her applications were reviewed fairly, and protected her career from those who might have blocked her path. During Sarah's crisis in Boston, Thomas had been there working behind the scenes. He had ensured she would find a position in Fairview when the time was right, and had helped establish the network of support that would eventually protect her and Oliver. His free clinics had served a dual purpose, helping those in need while creating safe havens for both his children. Every time the Blackwoods made a move against Elizabeth's plans, I countered them, Thomas explained. They never knew about my connection to the free clinics, never realized how much evidence I was gathering against them. His documentation of their corrupt practices had been meticulously maintained, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The most touching revelations were about Oliver's early days. Thomas had been nearby when Elizabeth went into labor, though he couldn't be with her. He'd watched from a distance as she implemented the final stages of her plan, making sure both mother and child were safe before disappearing back into his role as the silent guardian. Sarah discovered that many of the coincidences that had protected her weren't coincidences at all. The anonymous donor who had paid her legal fees in Boston, the mysterious maintenance man who had installed extra security in her apartment, even the car that had followed her home on late nights, all had been Thomas, watching over his expanded family. Elizabeth knew she was dying, he said softly, showing Sarah the final letters they had exchanged. She made me promise to stay hidden until you and Oliver had bonded, until the truth about your heritage was revealed. She believed the strength of your connection would need to be established before you learned about my role. His voice broke as he described watching Oliver from afar, seeing him grow in Sarah's care. Every day I wanted to step forward to hold my son. But Elizabeth was right, you needed to become his mother first, to prove to everyone, including yourself, that you were meant to be his guardian. Max, from his hospital bed, offered a weak tail wag as Thomas shared these revelations. The old dog had been part of this protection too, trained by Elizabeth to recognize Thomas and allow his silent vigilance over the family he couldn't yet claim openly. The most powerful evidence was a video Elizabeth had recorded just before her death, entrusted to Thomas for safekeeping. In it she detailed how Thomas had never abandoned them, how his apparent absence had been part of their careful plan to protect both Sarah and Oliver from the Blackwoods' influence. Our love story didn't end when I left Fairview, Elizabeth's image explained. It evolved into something larger, a shared mission to protect the next generation of true guardians. Thomas's strength was never in confrontation, but in his quiet, unwavering protection of those who needed it most. The final turning point came when Regina Henderson, Elizabeth's elderly aunt, and the last of the old guard, arrived at the veterinary clinic where Max lay fighting for his life. She moved slowly to Sarah's side, her eyes taking in the scene, Sarah holding Oliver, Thomas standing protectively nearby, and Max maintaining his weak but steady vigil. Elizabeth was right about everything, Regina said softly, placing a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. We lost our way, focusing on power instead of protection. But you've shown us what the Henderson legacy truly means. She produced a stack of documents, signed by the remaining Henderson family members, acknowledging Sarah's heritage and supporting her guardianship of Oliver. The Henderson family's public support changed everything. Regina spoke at an emergency court hearing, her testimony devastating to the Blackwoods' claims. We watched Sarah from afar. She revealed, seeing how she embodied the true spirit of protection that our family had nearly forgotten. Elizabeth didn't just choose her, she recognized one of our own. More Henderson relatives came forward, sharing stories of how Elizabeth had helped them understand the difference between wielding power and offering protection. They brought family records confirming Sarah's lineage through a branch that had chosen to live simply, focusing on service rather than wealth. Our family's strength was never in our money or influence, Regina explained to the court. It was in our capacity to protect others, a trait that Sarah has demonstrated more purely than any Henderson in generations. The family's lawyers presented evidence of how the Blackwoods had tried to corrupt this legacy, contrasting it with Sarah's natural guardianship. The most powerful moment came when the Henderson elders visited Max. The old dog, despite his injuries, demonstrated the same protective instincts that had guided his years of service. He recognized as true guardians, Regina observed, watching Max's reaction to Sarah and Oliver. Elizabeth trusted his judgment above all others. In a formal ceremony at Henderson Manor, the family officially acknowledged Sarah as a true heir to their legacy of protection. But more importantly, they recognized her role in helping them rediscover their own purpose. Through you, Regina told her, we've remembered what it means to be not just Hendersons but guardians of hope. As the sun set over the manor grounds, 3 generations of Hendersons gathered around Sarah, Thomas, Oliver, and Max, forming a circle of protection that bridged past and present. The family's acceptance wasn't just about bloodlines or birthmarks, it was about recognizing and supporting the true spirit of guardianship that Sarah had embodied all along. The morning Max first showed signs of recovery coincided with the final dismissal of the Blackwoods' custody claims. His eyes opened fully for the first time in weeks, focusing immediately on Oliver in Sarah's arms. The old dog's tail, though weak, began its familiar protective wag. His will to live was always tied to his mission to protect, Dr. Anderson explained, reviewing Max's improving vital signs. Now that Oliver's safety is assured, he's finally allowing himself to heal. Day by day, Max's strength returned, his guardian spirit proving stronger than his injuries. The community celebrated each milestone in Max's recovery. When he first managed to stand, Officer Jenkins brought his old K9 unit collar, polished to a shine. The day he took his first unsteady steps, the children of Fairview lined the clinic's hallway cheering him on. Every small victory became a shared triumph. Thomas spent hours helping with Max's physical therapy, gently rebuilding the strength in his damaged muscles. During these sessions, Max would watch Oliver playing nearby, his determination to rejoin his charge driving him to push through the pain. Sarah often found them all together, father, son, and faithful guardian, forming a picture of the family they had become. The most touching moment came when Max was finally strong enough to return home. The entire street turned out to welcome him, creating a guard of honor as he walked slowly but proudly up Sarah's front path. He paused at the top step, looking back at the gathered crowd, his posture reflecting years of silent service now openly acknowledged. Inside, Max went straight to his spot beside Oliver's crib, settling into his familiar protective position. Though his body bore the scars of his sacrifice, his eyes held the same steady wisdom that had guided him through years of guardianship. He was home, his family was safe, and his mission, though changed, would continue. The transformation of Henderson Manor marked the beginning of their new life together. Sarah and Thomas decided to renovate the old house, turning it into both a home and a continuation of Elizabeth's legacy of protection. The library became a resource center for families in need, while the East Wing was converted into a free medical clinic. Oliver thrived in this unconventional family setting. He spent his mornings with Sarah, afternoons in Thomas's clinic, helping to comfort young patients, and every moment under Max's watchful eye. The birthmark on his shoulder, once a source of contention, became a proud reminder of his heritage of protection. Claire Thompson and Regina Henderson became regular fixtures in their daily lives, sharing stories of Elizabeth and helping to document the family's evolving legacy. The manor's gardens, once overgrown, bloomed again with life as local children played under Max's gentle supervision. Sarah and Thomas's relationship deepened naturally, built on their shared commitment to protecting others. Their wedding in the manor's restored garden was a community celebration, with Max walking proudly beside Oliver, who carried the rings. The ceremony represented not just their union but the blending of all aspects of the Henderson legacy: protection, healing, and love. The most beautiful moments were the quiet ones: family dinners in the manor's kitchen, weekend picnics in the garden, evenings spent reading Elizabeth's journals together. Max would lie contentedly at their feet, his mission evolved from solitary guardian to beloved family protector. Regina often remarked how Elizabeth would have loved seeing her vision fulfilled, not just of Oliver's safety but of a family united by choice and purpose rather than obligation. The manor, once a symbol of power and privilege, became a living embodiment of what the Henderson legacy was always meant to be: a haven of protection and hope. 1 year after Max's recovery, Henderson Manor became a beacon of hope for Fairview and beyond. Sarah and Thomas established the Elizabeth Henderson Foundation, dedicated to protecting families in crisis. The foundation's first initiative was a network of medical clinics, combining Thomas's expertise with Sarah's commitment to comprehensive care. The manor's transformation embodied Elizabeth's vision perfectly. The grand entrance hall, once designed to intimidate, now welcomed families seeking refuge. The formal dining room became a community kitchen where Claire Thompson taught cooking classes to single parents. The gardens, under Max's watchful eye, provided a safe play space for children in temporary housing. Oliver grew into his role naturally, showing an innate understanding of what it meant to be a guardian. At just 3 years old, he already displayed the same intuitive empathy that had marked both Elizabeth and Sarah, gravitating toward those who needed comfort or protection. Max, though slowed by age, remained his constant companion and teacher. The foundation's work expanded through quiet acts of protection. Sarah's hospital shifts still included helping patients escape dangerous situations. Thomas's clinics provided more than medical care, becoming safe havens for those starting new lives. Every success honored Elizabeth's memory and vindicated her faith in love's power to heal and protect. The most profound legacy was the change in Fairview itself. The town became known as a place where help could always be found, where protection meant more than just security. The Henderson birthmark, once sought for its supposed power, came to symbolize the simple truth Elizabeth had always known: that true strength lies in the choice to protect others. Max, in his twilight years, watched over it all with evident satisfaction. His mission had evolved from guarding a secret to protecting a legacy, from being a solitary sentinel to part of a family dedicated to continuing Elizabeth's work. The sight of him dozing in the garden, surrounded by playing children and watching over his expanded family, became a living symbol of the Henderson legacy: protection offered freely, with love and without condition. Dear valued viewers, thank you for joining us for this heartwarming tale of love, protection, and family bonds. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which moments resonated with you most. What did you think about Max's unwavering loyalty, Sarah's determination, or Elizabeth's sacrifice? Support our team by subscribing to our channel, where we bring you more inspiring stories that celebrate the triumph of love over adversity. Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends and family who might need a reminder that true strength lies in protecting others. Your engagement helps us continue creating meaningful content that touches hearts and reminds us all of the power of compassion and unconditional love. Stay tuned for more stories that explore the depths of human connection and the extraordinary bonds that unite us all.